Hi there, and welcome back to Beebe Book Buzz. My name's Karen Stern, and I'm here with my colleagues Beth Radcliffe and Bridget Black from the Reference Department. And we're here, as always, to give you a little taste of what we've been reading lately in hopes that you can find your next great read. Today we have a sad note to add because we have to say goodbye to Bridget. Bridget's leaving us, and this will be her last hurrah at Book Buzz. Because she's heading over to Somerville to work at the library there. We think we might invite her back for a guest appearance at some time soon. But we wish you all the best, and we will miss your shining face and your great reader's advisory expertise, and especially in the areas of romance. And horror and disasters.
Disasters, right?
Yeah, you look my offbeat taste.
We will definitely miss you. But and so we're going to let you go first today. You get pole position because you are the guest of honor.
Okay.
So I'll let you start. Go for it.
Okay. So I'm here to discuss the book A Fatal Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum,
Yes.
which is a chronicle of murder in ancient Rome.
Now this is nonfiction.
It's nonfiction,
Yes.
exactly. It is a nonfiction book about murder, not a particular murder case, but instead sort of the concept of murder in ancient Rome as a whole. It is actually very fascinating because Emma Southon, who wrote it, has a doctorate in history, and she really does do the deep historical work that is what does murder look like in a society so far removed from our own. Our conception of murder is entirely alien to the conception of murder of ancient Rome. They don't have the same concept of personhood, they don't have the same concept of violence, they don't have the same concept of any of this.
Right.
And so she really does do a lot of deep work into what does it look like to have murder in this society, and what isn't murder also, like what kinds of death are not murder.
Right.
So there's a lot of there's a chapter on like judicial murder, which is as we would term it, like executions.
Right.
So it is executions, and you're like, okay, well, so Rome executed people, but it's like they executed people on a scale we could not assume, like,
Right.
And also there's she goes into this where it's like there's kind of like two different kinds of executions that you see in Chronicles, and it's like, here's just the boring humdrum crucifixions. Oh, we've all seen that before. And like,
Right.
like when you talk about like, oh, they beheaded this guy, and that wasn't that great. Or there's like these immense spectacles where they like construct elaborate devices to murder people in a way that is, and then so they get described as being like, oh, that's so amazing, and like recreating myths. There is one where it's like a person who is Orpheus is like sitting in a grove and like playing a instrument, and then a trap opens and a bear comes out and eats him. Now in the description it does say this alone was done not according to the myth,
I was wondering.
As we all know, I do not recall Orpheus being killed by a bear.
Yeah.
But this is like, these are like snuff movies almost.
Yes, and
it's like what we would
entertainment.
consider, this is murder as theater.
As
Yeah.
theater, yes.
Wow.
And that these would happen in between gladiatorial games, which are also kind of murder as theater,
Right.
though you didn't necessarily always, gladiatorial games didn't always end in
right,
death.
and the intent was not
it's not-
necessarily this
Yeah.
one person is going to die,
Yes,
right?
yeah.
It's slightly different.
It would go, like, it's really fascinating to be
Wow.
like, if you are regularly having that, even though they are clear, those are not regular occurrences, those are special occasion occurrences.
Right.
What does it mean to think of sort of a regular murder? Like, what does murder take on in
Like
that?
the Miss Marple kind.
Yes, the Miss Marple kind. And in a lot of cases, Rome actually didn't have like provisions against murder. People died in things that happened, but it was a different crime that was really the problem. Like, Romans were very opposed to human sacrifice, so if you had killed someone in sort of a magical act, the problem is that you were doing magic, not that you had killed someone. The problem was the
just a whole different set of
like a different
value
set of value
system.
system.
Yeah.
And they were very
So if you murdered your neighbor,
it
would
might
be okay unless you did it as a spiritual.
Well, it might be
thing.
okay and it might not be okay. It really
Depends who
did
your
depend
neighbor
on who your
is.
neighbor is and who you were and
Oh.
what was happening. And
Wow.
one of their like most hated crimes they're so worried about was parricide, like killing your father or a parent. And there's a famous murder case where someone was accused of this. He definitely didn't do it. He was not in the place where it happened, but was accused by a neighbor. And the neighbors are like, well, as she writes, the neighbors must have assumed that the mere, like, suggestion would be so much that no one would take up his cause. But so that they're a family, they're both named Titus. So there's two, it's a father and son, they're both named Titus. Everyone has the same name also, which she didn't
Right.
think so. And it was Titus. So it's like, that they would condemn Rusius on the basis that no one would dare to make up such a terrible accusation. Like, it's so terrible. But so she goes on, and this also gives you a bit of the tone of the book, because it's quite funny as well. In this case, however, it backfired wildly, because the Tituses hadn't reckoned with Cicero, whose love of his own voice and people looking at him exponentially outweighed his feelings about everything else, including parricide.
Wow.
And so Cicero defends this person, and we know this because Cicero wrote down his defense speech,
Right.
and it exists, so you can tell what he said.
And
he
so
won the
his
case.
personality was such that
So
it obliterated,
everything
wow.
that happened. And if you're familiar with ancient Rome, Cicero comes up a lot. He's a fairly famous character. So
So they did have a celebrity culture,
They
even
did
if they
have
didn't have a culture
Yeah.
of murder.
yes, exactly. Like, there are famous gladiators. There's famous people that it's really interesting if you are a history fan, like if you enjoy history, particularly ancient history. I think this is a really unusual and interesting way to get into like the Roman mindset and the feeling. And I should say she is Dr. Emma Southon. She hosts a history podcast called History
cool.
is Sexy. So, and I think that's kind of the tone that you're looking at here too. So if you enjoy like a funny history podcast, I know there are lots of them, or the odd drunk history episode, this probably would appeal to you.
Yeah.
But I do think it really does. I did learn a lot, and I think that it has a lot to say about sort of what ancient Rome is like, a place that is wholly alien to us. Like that's really there's so much.
Right.
The gulf of time is so big between that.
And we like to think of ourselves as, somehow like direct descendants of the ancient Rome, ancient Greek, this kind of stuff. But there's these huge
ways
differences.
that we can't
even relate.
We can't even relate to them. We can't
that's
fathom
really
their
cool.
minds.
What was the name of the podcast again?
So her podcast is called History is Sexy.
History is Sexy. Okay.
Well, the author reminds me of Mary Roach, because she writes all these
Yes,
funny historical ones
about science.
About
science,
yes.
But their history too, like Grunt is about warfare, and so she goes through the history of warfare. So I think that sounds like the same type of writing too.
Yeah, sort of a popular. Yes, if you had read like those kinds of popular science books, it would be in line with those.
Right. Cool. That sounds great.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, had to bring one last really offbeat choice.
Right. It's kind of a disaster, but murder is
a personal disaster.
It certainly is. High on my list of personal disasters.
I definitely don't want it to happen to me.
All right, Beth.
Okay, my book is by Brandon Hobson. It's called The Removed.
The Removed. Yes, I thought it was The Removal, and it was The Removed, yes.
So, a quick summary. It's the plot follows a week in the life of the Ichola family as they anticipate the anniversary of their son Ray Ray's death by a policeman. So they're celebrating his memory. He was killed at age 15 years ago. So it's told in 4 different voices: that of Ray Ray's mother, that of Ray Ray's sister, his brother, and then an ancient spirit, an ancient ancestor spirit. The ancestor refused to leave his homeland in the American Southeast in the 1800s, and the U.S. government forced all the Native Americans off of those lands, and they took a trek all the way to Oklahoma, which was over 500 miles, and it was called the Trail of Tears.
Trail of Tears.
And about 15,000 indigenous people died on that, and 4,000 of them were Cherokee. The different narrators are joined together with the themes of loss, the theme of ties to nature, memory, the spirit world, and also by the Trail of Tears, which is not a distant memory for them. It's very present, it's persistent. Hobson mines traditional Cherokee stories, which adds depth to the novel, and also the element of surreal. Ray Ray's brother Edgar is an addict, and when he leaves his girlfriend, he ends up wandering into the Darkened Land. The Darkened Land is a mythological place for the Cherokee, and you go there when you die, and when justice prevails, then you leave it. So it's very dark land, it's gloomy, it's dust, it's rotting buildings, very evocative. With the clarity that Hobson does create that darkening land, he also is great at doing natural landscape. So the earth, the sky, the animals. So that lightens the darkening place a little. The other thing about his portrayal is that nature in his book is very physical, as I was saying, but it's also metaphorical, and it's also a thematic presence. You could even call the earth a character in the novel. The other characters in the novel, they're flawed and they have very distinct voices. They're all dealing with generational trauma and with the trauma of losing Ray Ray. What makes them interesting and draws you in is their growth, the way they experience growth. There also is another character, Wyatt, who they foster. And he's kind of the reincarnation of Ray Ray, and he's a wonderful character. He's really alive and light and funny. So he brings a lot of healing to them. Let's see, what else did I want to tell you about that? Hobson wants you to experience all these characters, to inhabit them, so that you can get the sense of other people's darkness as well as their humanity. I think he does a great job of that. After I read this, I looked up the statistics about Native Americans and their death by police encounter, and it was just, I'll tell you what it is. Native Americans, this is by the CDC, they're 2 times more likely to be killed by police than white people. This is from statistics from 2019. And they're 1.2 times more likely than black people. And Native women, I know, Native women are 38 more times more likely to be killed than white people, than white women. And Native men are 14 more times more likely to be killed than white men. So they're astounding statistics. And this, in a different way, is an astounding book that draws attention to the plight of Native Americans and also their resilience. So it's a really good read. It's literary. I think it would be good for book group because it has so many themes, so many ideas, so much imagery and metaphor, and the names are important. It's just
There's
great
a
all
lot
around.
of richness in there.
Yeah. And in that way, I think Louise Erdrich is a really good read-alike.
Yeah.
Any of her books.
Yeah.
And then there's another novel takes place it's about the Trail of Tears. And that one's called Pushing the Bear by Diane Clancy. And the author really liked, and I think it is a good read-alike, Crooked Hallelujah.
Right.
Which is by Kelly Jo Ford.
Yeah.
And I guess there's one more. I would also say They're There by Tommy Orange. I think that's a good read alike in a present day.
Yeah.
Right.
We're actually, I mean, it's a really amazing time for Native
Yeah.
American
Yeah.
literature, I think. There's
I
so
think so,
many
too.
different people writing and
Yeah.
writing so many different things that there's
Yeah.
a lot out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is
and I
the
think-
second one I've read in like 2 weeks.
That combination of tragedy and sadness combined
Yeah.
with hope and resilience comes through in so many of the authors. And I'm reading Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall
Yeah.
Kimmerer right
Yeah.
now. And, you know, that's a nonfiction, and she is both a plant biologist and has Native American heritage, and so she looks at plants and the natural world
Yeah. Yeah.
from both sides, and it's really astounding. She mixes. It sounds similar in a way that mixes myth with science with her own kind of experience. You know, just almost like
Yeah.
memoir. It's all sort of mixed up
Cool.
together in
Yeah.
this way. It's a great listen. She reads it herself, and it feels really important though that
Yeah.
mix of, you know,
Those connections.
all of those
Yeah.
connections together for all of us today. You know, all of us learning how to deal with tragedies and still look forward,
Yeah.
be hopeful, be
Yeah.
resilient. It's really important. So sounds like a good one.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Book group, your book group.
Okay, book group, got it. All right. And now my book actually is 2 books. It's I mentioned it really briefly last time, and there's a series called, it's a little book, 2-book series, and they're both very short books. So the Monk and Robot series by Becky Chambers, and the first one is called A Psalm for the Wild-Built, and that's the one that I mentioned very briefly last month. And the second one has just come out, and it's called A Prayer for the Crown Shy. That's this one here. And the two together are an arc. I don't believe there are more. Everywhere I look, I can only find the 2, and it does feel like it came to a sort of resting place. But it also feels like if she wanted to write more, she could. So I hope she does, because it's an amazing world she's created, and again has this feeling of hope that it presents to us in a really kind of unique way. So she's a sci-fi writer, Becky Chambers, and she's best known for her Wayfarer series. But despite the fact that one of the characters is a robot, I wouldn't like go all in with calling this sci-fi. It has elements of it for sure, but it feels more like a fable, like a kind of a gentle fable that maybe meets a buddy movie, and that's the kind of vibe we're talking about. There's these 2 beings, the monk and the robot, who become friends, and they explore together what it means to be alive. So to set the scene, we are living in a different planet. It's actually a moon. But honestly, it feels a lot like Earth. I mean, you know, the habitats, the cities, the everything. I mean, it's in a different time, but it feels like it's recognizable. The only thing is, instead of the moon rising, the planet rises. You know, it's slightly takes you back every once in a while. Anyway, about 200 years ago on this moon, all of the robots who were doing the jobs that robots do for us now, so again, feels very Earth-like in that way. All the robots in the factories and in science and all the places that robots do things for us woke up, and they became sentient. And then they collectively decided that they were going to move out away from humans and move into the wilderness and be observers of nature. And so basically, nobody has heard from a robot since they made this decision. And as you can imagine, it was a giant upheaval in society to have robots leave, and it caused a whole bunch of changes, which I'll talk about a little bit later. So nobody's seen one since, until Sibling Dex is getting out of the shower one day. And I should give you a little background. Sibling is the sort of title for a monk. So he's the monk, or they are the monk of the story. Their pronouns are they, them. And Sibling Dex is getting out of the shower one day, coming out of their tea wagon, because they are a tea monk. And what tea monks do is kind of like be like a traveling psychologist. They go around with their wagon from place to place, and people hear that they're coming, and they all come with their problems, and the sibling, whoever the sibling of the tea monk, brews them up a beautiful cup of tea that's just made for the kinds of problems that they have, and they chat, and then they go off and drink their tea in solitude for a while. And that's what a tea monk's job is. Yeah, doesn't it? Don't we all want a tea monk? Anyway, so
can you invent this job?
Yes, Sibling Dex is in the forest in their tea wagon, and they step out of the shower, and there's this robot, right? This being that no one is kind of mythological in a way, because no one has seen one of them in 200 years. And you've learned about them in history books, and there it is, the robot. And the robot is saying, tell me what you need. And Sibling Dex is standing there without a towel and is like going, wait, this is like all too much. And there's a lot of gentle humor like that in it. It's nice. And tell me what you need and what can I do to help. And it turns out that this robot, Moscap, has been sent on a mission to find out what humans need. So he's sent to ask this question of humans. And the two of them decide to embark on this journey together, where Sibling Dex is going to introduce Moscap to the world, and Moscap will be able to ask his questions of humans. And so they start on this adventure, which it really is what it is. It's this combination of adventure story. They have some, very physical adventures, some very intellectual adventures, and they this bond grows between them. So there's the buddy movie, right? And the monk is this lovely, searching. If I had to guess, I'd say Sibling Dex is probably in their 30s, early 30s or something, still trying to figure out exactly what they're doing with their lives. So he's kind of got that going on. And then the robot is this kind of like a childlike curiosity, delighted in everything, and like asking tons and tons of questions, and kind of annoying, really. And there's some humor in all of that too. Anyway, so I would say my favorite thing about this book is that tone, is that feeling that it gives you of, it feels like someone's telling you a bedtime story. It's kind of that kind of soothing.
Nice.
It's actually speaking of, it's a great listen, really good listen. But at the same time, there's all these deep philosophical questions that the two of them are taking on as they travel, about the importance of finding purpose or not finding purpose. Like, is it important that I find purpose in my life? It's one of Dex's big problems. And what it means to be sentient, and all kinds of things. So it has a lot of depth to it, but the tone of it is like you're sitting and chatting to your best friend over coffee, or over the campfire, or whatever. It doesn't have, he's not, Chambers isn't like pulling out Kierkegaard and Nietzsche and hitting you over the head with like big ideas. You're just chatting. So it's, as I said, also a little bit funny that in spots, there's a lot of, Dex is constantly getting annoyed with the robot, because he's just a little bit annoying, even though he's wonderful. And then the other thing I think is the setting and the kind of the place. I love this cover. It's beautiful. I don't know if you can see the detail, but it's worth looking at in detail. It feels a little bit like utopia, but in the tradition of really good sci-fi writers, it's not just bam, the rainbows and unicorns just appeared and everything was happily ever after. She weaves in, some intimations of what it was like before, and what humans have done to turn this world around and clean it up. The rivers run clean now. There's air. There's people are living much more in harmony with nature. Buildings are made out of casein, which is a plastic that we use now, which is made from plant fibers. It's so again, this is what science fiction does really well, right? It connects our reality to something in the future that looks better, different. And she does that really, really well. And it's, again, not hitting you over the head with it. They're just kind of background, but she brings all that stuff in really well. So I think the epigraph of the first book, I think I said this last time, was for anybody who could use a break. And that's what these books really and truly are. They're lovely, funny, relationship novel, a little bit of adventure thrown in, and a lot of interesting thoughts about why we're all alive and what we're doing here. So I would highly recommend these, and they won't take you long, for sure. I mean, 150 pages maybe each. So.
Earlier we were talking about this and kind of the hopefulness and the like that they're gentle and nice. And I was thinking, it occurred to me afterwards that there's a line, and this has come up because I've seen this in some other things, so I think that this is kind of a recurring, this is also kind of a sci-fi recurring thing right now.
Absolutely.
It's actually in The Last Jedi, the Star Wars movie from several years ago. One of the characters says that this is how we win, not by destroying what we hate, but by protecting what we love. And that kind of feels, and that has then shown up in several other things, that theme, where it's like you don't win by hating things, you win by loving things, and you win by caring. And that kind of seems appropriate to this as well.
It does. And I think there's a movement, I feel like I'm starting to see that more and more in books, not just sci-fi, but sci-fi often does lead the way in those sort of things, and romance, a lot of the genre fiction does kind of lead the way. I feel like I'm seeing that more in the books that I'm buying for the library. It's like, how can we think of this differently instead of despairing and hating and all of those negative things? How can we look at things in a way? And again, back to the themes from Native American literature that's coming out in such numbers right now. It's like there is reason to be positive about this.
When I would say, like, I was thinking, it's somewhat inevitable with Beth, I was thinking of Stephen Graham Jones and his, which is obviously, those are horror books, but even those have Native characters that are, it's like the way that his most recent books end are sort of by drawing upon the love you have for things. It's not about hating, it's not about defeating a monster, it's about loving yourself and loving the people that you love matter. And
that's A Wrinkle in Time.
Well, there you go.
That's true. All the way back to A Wrinkle in Time.
There you go. Yeah. So there is for those of you who feel like it's all doom and gloom, keep reading those books, because there's a lot of good stuff coming, and there's things that will inspire you and give you some hope. We will write all of those, as many as we can remember, in the credits at the end. You can see some of those hopeful books coming up. So until next time, I think we say goodbye, and we say goodbye to Bridget. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me and giving me this opportunity to share everyone my unusual tastes.
Not always so unusual.
Yeah,
we have loved it. Anyway, we thank you for being with us, and we will see you next time on Beebe Book Buzz.